The recent news of the Israeli army killing Hassan Nasrallah may seem like another chapter in the long, relentless story of violence in the Middle East. To many in the West, it's easy to dismiss it as just another military encounter in a region often viewed as perpetually unstable. But what if we took a step back and examined this event through a different lens, a cultural lens? When we peel back the layers of politics and military strategies, we begin to see that the conflict between Hezbollah and Israel is deeply rooted in centuries of cultural identity, religious tradition, and historical trauma that have shaped the societies involved. For Western audiences, Hezbollah is often perceived through a narrow prism, a militant group or even terrorist organization. But to fully grasp what this incident means, we have to look at Hezbollah from within Lebanon. Hezbollah is not just a political movement or militia. It is an integral part of the social fabric for many Shiite Muslims in Lebanon. It provides security, infrastructure, and social services, almost acting as a government within a government. It influences education, media, and even religious expression. When Israel targets Hezbollah leaders, it sends shock waves through the communities that rely on this group for their cultural and social identity, not just their military protection. In Israel, the cultural context is just as rich. Since its founding in 1948, the country has faced an existential struggle for survival, a narrative deeply embedded in Jewish cultural memory. The Holocaust, centuries of persecution and exile have created a collective mindset where defense and military action are seen not just as strategies, but as essential for survival. The Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, are a cornerstone of Israeli society. Young Israelis spend years in compulsory military service, meaning every family has a direct link to the state's defense apparatus. This culture of vigilance and resilience is reinforced by a geopolitical environment that has for decades been hostile. When Israel acts against Hezbollah, it is not just reacting to a military threat, it is reaffirming its cultural imperative of self-preservation and the protection of a homeland, viewed as both a historical and spiritual right. But beyond these immediate reactions, we also have to consider the long-standing cultural and religious dynamics at play. The roots of the Hezbollah-Israel conflict stretch back, not just to modern politics, but to centuries of tension between different religious and ethnic groups in the region. From the Ottoman Empire's control of the Levant to the post-World War I mandates that redrew borders with little regard for cultural boundaries, the people of this region have been shaped by forces far larger than themselves. These historical wounds inform the present-day conflicts, where religion, politics, and identity are inextricably linked. For Western audiences, understanding this context can be challenging. We often view these events through the simplified narrative of terrorism versus defense. But conflict like this cannot be reduced to black and white categories. In the same way that the Irish Republican Army, the IRA, was seen as both a freedom-fighting force and a terrorist organization, Hezbollah occupies a dual space in Lebanon. To many, they are protectors of their cultural identity, while to others, they represent a destabilizing force. This duality is essential to understand if we are to fully grasp the cultural complexities that keep this conflict alive. Moreover, the cultural impact of violence on both Israelis and Lebanese cannot be overlooked. Imagine growing up in an environment where conflict shapes not only your politics, but your entire cultural identity. From art and music to family gatherings and religious life in these regions is marked by an ever-present sense of vulnerability and the need for resilience. For many, the threat of violence is not an abstract possibility. It is a daily reality. The arts, literature, and social customs in both Israel and Lebanon reflect this tension, creating a culture that is deeply connected to survival and endurance. Understanding these cultural responses to conflict allows us to humanize the story, moving beyond statistics and political rhetoric to the lived experiences of the people. But here's where it gets even more interesting for us in the West. How do our cultural lenses shape the way we view this conflict? Media narrative often simplify these events, casting Israel as the defender and Hezbollah as the aggressor, or vice versa, depending on the outlet. Yet, if we reflect on our own historical struggles, whether it be America's civil rights movements, Europe's battles with nationalism, or even the modern culture wars, we can see that culture and identity are at the heart of all these conflicts. What's happening between Hezbollah and Israel is a complex negotiation of cultural survival, identity, and power, not unlike the struggles many Western nations have faced in different forms. Ultimately, as we look at the headlines about the killing of Nasrallah, we must see beyond just the immediate military implications. We should take the time to understand the deep cultural roots that fuel this conflict, whether it's the historical narrative of survival in Israel or the cultural identity embedded in Hezbollah's role in Lebanon. The stakes are much higher than a mere power struggle. They are about the cultural futures of two people locked in a tragic, seemingly unending cycle. Perhaps, by viewing these events through a cultural lens, we in the West can begin to grasp the full weight of the conflict, seeing it not as a distant, perpetual crisis, but as a deeply human story, shaped by centuries of identity, struggle, and survival.